Good evening. Tonight's video, first of all, good evening. And tonight's video is going to be a sort of a recap from this week of what we got to know and the unfolding statements we had today in the news media. And I guess the most interesting thing is the declaration of victory over Mariupol, with the Azov Brigade basically being encircled in that steel works plant there with 200 plus civilians for one. And now the announcement today is that the focus seems to be shifting to the south towards Odessa and Transnistria. That doesn't come as a surprise to me, and I think I pointed that out in my very first video. And the reason why is because the grand finale, from what it is shaping up now, is since they couldn't get Kiev in the first place because the southern flank basically was missing to move in, they regrouped and moved, material and manpower around to take Mariupol, to get that sorted out, and then now it's going to go on to Odessa and Transnistria. Transnistria is not going to be very difficult because it is already Russian aligned. It is just to get that path through via Odessa for troop movement. And the reason why we can almost say this with certainty is the troop deployment and machinery deployment the Russians have in Belarus on the northern flank, going quite a bit around. And this is the typical scenario where you have this Company A goes left around the mountain, the hill, and Company B goes around on the right-hand side, and then they join in the backside of it and take it. That is a regular, you learn that in military school. That is one of these typical scenarios. And the original assessment of the Russian military, of the high command, was that they could take Kiev just from the north and from the east, from the way they moved in there, more or less. But that turned out to be too difficult. Okay, so now at least the picture is shaping up. I think this war is going to come to an end once the grand finale takes place and they encircle Kiev. And then it's going to take however long it's going to take until Kiev falls. And then the war is going to be over and the Russians are going to take the Ukraine. That's going to be the scenario which we're looking at. And of course, that will be a lot of fighting. That is going to be heavy fighting. If that is going to go to that direction, it probably is going to go, first of all, in stages. And they're going to go in steps in this to see on how far they need to go, what the losses are, and then work out the details as they go along. That's kind of what that is. But it is the same strategy what the Red Army basically did with Stalingrad. And now you have the Azov brigade there in that steel plant, and they're basically encircled. And that is sort of a miniature version of Stalingrad. The 6th Army, by the time they had taken Stalingrad, before they got encircled, I think had 120,000 men left at that point. They came in with 150 or 60,000, and the 40,000 or so, 40 to 60,000 either died, or got injured. Basically, that was the scenario. So by the time Stalingrad was in German hands, or in the hands of the Wehrmacht, that was basically, they had 100,000, 120,000 men left. Then the Red Army started the counter-offensive, and they were able to break through on both flanks, joining the rear. And with that Stalingrad got encircled, and we saw exactly the same thing in a miniature scale at the steel plant there with the Azov Brigade. And as we noticed, they starved out the German Wehrmacht there with 100,000 men. There's several more who died, so that's by the time they surrendered. Hitler had given a command not to surrender, and then the general in charge of the 6th Army, I forgot his name, he decided he's going to throw in the towel, and they're going to go and surrender to the Russians, to the Red Army, and that's what they did. That particular army was then, they became prisoners of war. They were transported to various gulags over within the Soviet Union at the time, and they did not return until 1955 to West Germany. There were 10,000 of them left. 90,000 of them died, or they remained in the Soviet Union. Some of them had joined the Communist Party, and they were politically trained, and they were released into East Germany. Quite a few of the officers then formed the East German military there. They helped building that up in 1952, 1954. But the bulk, or whatever was the remainder, was about 10,000. And they weren't released until Konrad Adenauer, the chancellor at the time, traveled to Moscow. That was his first trip in 1955. And negotiated the release of these 10,000 prisoners. And I think 4 weeks later, they got back to West Germany, and they were able. But this is basically all what was left of it. They were basically prisoner of war for 10 years. And so with this Azov Brigade, I looked at the symbols they're using, and this is one of these primary focuses of this denazification thing, what the Russians are trying to tell us. And like I said before, is you're not dealing with Nazis like you would have had in the SS or in the SA, or in the Nazi party itself. Just for the main reason is they're not Aryans, for one. However, with these symbols, they have chosen the that black sun, and the wolf's angle. This is already going into the far right spectrum. There is no question about it. This is not your regular army, middle of the road kind of a combat group. This is already politically quite a bit to the right, if not to the far right. And so you could say that they're probably ultra-nationalists, ultra-right-wing nationalists, Ukrainian nationalists, who have copied or looked at some of the ideas and some of the stuff which Himmler, especially in Heydrich, had set up there in Wewelsburg, at their spiritual center, especially with that black sun thing and the wolf's angle and all of the stuff. Himmler and Heydrich both were into occultism quite a bit. Neither one of them were religious people. They had religious upbringings to a certain extent, but they were not religious people, neither Catholic or Protestants. And they were trying to find the old pagan rituals out of this northern territory up there in Lithuania and in East Prussia. Prussia itself, I forgot to mention it in my other video, the original Prussians were a tribe which were extinct by about 1600 or so. The real Prussian DNA, which probably has survived over time to a certain extent, is going to be with the Lithuanian people, because it is really, like I said, their territory. And there were probably more of the Prussian tribe people, the pagan Prussians, in Lithuania anytime, with the Christianity movement and everything else, with these, what do they call them, the, when the knights go through and Christianize everything. they were the main target, basically, to turn them around and bring them to Christianity that was Catholic. So crusades, but they did the crusade up there into Lithuania, trying to convert these native people. That was a tribe, basically, maybe 40,000 people or something like this at the very most. Anyway, a lot of this stuff, these symbols and everything else, came out of this paganism, out of Northern Europe, out of the Scandinavian range up there in Lithuania, Estland, that kind of area, from these original Prussians. Now, I have none of this Prussian DNA in me, because the House of Hohenzollern never originated out of that area. We came out of southern Germany. We moved up, through wars and this, that, and the other thing, up to the Berlin area, Brandenburg, like I said before. And then that came about in this whole, situation back then with whatever they had going. I mean, that's long water down the drain anyway. So with us now looking at this, so they have adopted these symbols, which clearly puts them into the right-wing group in a democratic state. If you look at the German military, at the American military, and almost any Western military, those kind of symbols would create a huge problem if you have that within one branch or within a group, within a branch of a group, within a branch of the military. If that would evolve, that would be probably very quickly dealt with, and that would be most likely prohibited. That the Ukrainian government then, I guess, and the military didn't object to this, brings, I would say that is a questionable, thing. If you're claiming on one hand democracy, and then on the other hand is you have armed forces, which are supporting these kind of right-wing ideologies, or looking up at this and adopting these type of symbols, which I think that would not be acceptable. Anyways, and now these people are sitting there in that steelworks. What they're going to do with them, I don't know. What they're going to do with the civilians. If they do what they did with the Wehrmacht, then out of that 900 people with the injured, what they have right now depends on how many are going to succumb to the injuries because of no treatment. If they do get a hold of them, they're probably going to wind up in some gulag for God knows how long. And then there's going to be maybe 10 of them or 20 of them or 50 of them left by the time that is done. That's kind of the direction this is heading with this Azov Brigade thing. If you can get them out of there, I don't know. The Wehrmacht was not able to break through the rear defense part of Stalingrad because of a lack of material and, lack of gasoline. That was the biggest problem, and just a general lack of supplies. And the other thing is, the other army had moved further south towards the Caspian Sea down there, I think it is, because of oil, and they wanted to break almost through to Turkey at that point, or that area, Kazakhstan down there, for oil. So there was not enough troops anymore left in the rear of or further west of Stalingrad to mount any counter-offensive. That's where the German Wehrmacht completely screwed up, and that was partially Hitler's fault. Now, in terms of weaponry, since it is becoming now more and more clear that the Ukrainian army will need heavy equipment, tanks, and that sort of stuff, that it is going to get to that point, is the German papers today suspected that Chancellor Scholze, when he went to Moscow, was basically told by Putin that Putin, if Germany would deliver weapons, could potentially use nuclear weapons against Germany. So this is something, since none of us was there, since no one listened to this conversation, since that happened only between Putin and Scholz, we don't know what was said. I think the only people present at that was the translators. Putin is fluent in German. I do not know. Usually they do have translators there, just to make sure that everything is translated properly. But as far as I know, there's no transcripts of these talks they had prior to the invasion and that sort of stuff. So we don't know. Now, the other thing to understand is this. The Social Democrats in West Germany, which this party basically is he belongs to, and he has belonged to since a young age. He's from Hamburg. He grew up in Hamburg. Had in their party agenda communism as final goal. Okay? So this was a reason why no German really in West Germany voted for them in the first election in 1949 and then in the 1950s. Sometime in the 1950s, when Helmut Schmidt, the former chancellor, and Willy Brandt became more established in the old, against the old socialists like Schumacher, which was, from the 1919, 1918 revolution left over in this picture. Brandt was already active at that point too, Willy Brandt. They met at a party convention. I forgot when that was. I think it was between 1957 and 1963, in that 5-year range, in Bad Godesberg. And it was at that party convention that the delegates voted to take the end game or the end goal of communism out of the party agenda, and to accept social capitalism, basically, as a form of economic system. Basically what Konrad Adenauer had established with the Western allies, with the United States and the United Kingdom, and then France too, in these sectors, in the Western sectors. And they were okay. That's when the change came, and it was then by the mid-60s that people started to vote for the Social Democrats. And first then we had, in 65 or so, the big coalition, 64, between Christian Democrats and the Socialists. And then with Willy Brandt, eventually, I think it was in 1968, 69 or somewhere around there, actually becoming the strongest party. We had only 3 parties, the Social Democrats, the Christian Democrats, and the FDP, the Libertarian Party, in this picture. And so by that time they had become acceptable to the middle class, and Germany was doing extremely well at that time in the mid-60s. Like I explained, they had gone through this big boom of reconstruction, Germany, West Germany especially, and they all had gotten their wealth back, and it was going up and up and that sort of stuff. And then that was more explainable because of this, with their former communist belief system and everything else, with Willy Brandt being there in the Weimar Republic already, having had ties in the Soviet Union with the Soviet communists and everything else. The Social Democrats tend to be a Russian supporter or more Soviet friendly. It was Willy Brandt who traveled to East Germany at that point and established, diplomatic relations between the two sides, and, made the travel for West Germans into East Germany easier and that sort of stuff. And then a lot of things going on with Brezhnev at the time. And so there's this understanding there. And the Christian Democrats were not that keen of it. And a lot of the Prussians and all dislocated people from World War II were primarily conservative people who voted for the Christian Democrats. And they saw the Social Democrats as a traitor on their interests in the lands east. So that came on top of it. So they have always been more Russian friendly or more Russian supportive. And that is the reason why this whole thing with these gas pipelines and all of this stuff came up. And it was all orchestrated and done by the current members of the Social Democratic Party, the interest. You had the former Chancellor, what's his name now? I forgot it. Gerhard, who took a job then with Gazprom after he got out of office and Merkel took over. So he is heavily involved in it. He's real good buddies with Putin. And Steinmeier was involved in all of the stuff forwards and backwards. And they have looked away in all of these dealings, with what the Soviet Union or today's Russia did, say like in the last 20 years or so, since 2000. And this is another part why they're so hesitant, is to get rid of this internal history they have and their brotherhood among socialistic. Putin has quite a socialist background. He may not be a communist, but he is, he's the typical candidate for socialist brotherhood, and the man companionship and that sort of stuff. So they're reluctant. That like I said, they're going through tremendous turmoil. On the other hand, we don't know what was said. Like I said before, we don't know whether or not we're gonna start nuclear war with us. They haven't done anything with the American weapon systems. They probably haven't had a reason yet, because according to the official statements, the war is going, or that special military operations are going according to plan. And if that keeps going according to plan, the West is probably going to be fairly safe, even though when we deliver weapons into this. Now, we have had disputes before. You can go to the Korean War, you can go to the Vietnam War, or you can go to the Afghanistan War. And the most recent one was the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And the Afghanis were supplied through the CIA channels, with weaponry. And they successfully, took 10 years, but they got rid of the Russians, basically. In Vietnam, the tables were turned. Here you had the Chinese and the Russians supporting, or the Soviet Union at the time, supporting the North Vietnamese with weapons and logistics and stuff like this against the United States. And you had a similar situation in North Korea. Both wars did not end very well for the United States. In Afghanistan, it turned, and it didn't turn out very well for the Soviet Union. Now, if they're going to keep doing the same strategy in this, what they employed, because we didn't have a nuclear war as a result out of this. On the other hand, is the Russia or the Soviet Union did not, or China did not supply heavy tanks and heavy artillery against, to the North Vietnamese, just weapons and regular gear and that sort of stuff, and ammunition, and those things. On the other hand, is they were very savvy fighters, and the Americans had their hands full with their guerrilla warfare kind of structure. And this is kind of the same thing what we're seeing here. If this is kept on a level of a guerrilla warfare, we're probably not going to get into any nuclear showdown. If, however, there's a massive amount of American, German, French, whatever tanks and heavy artillery going to show up on the battlefield, this may change the course in this entire war. Now, I do not know. It is very difficult to predict this. If the Soviet Union would, say, use a short-range, battlefield-type nuclear weapon, which has a very limited area, then it is primarily soldiers and some civilians which are there. The NATO is not going to respond to this. So you have a nuclear action in a country, to fight off this heavy equipment. If the NATO, which I doubt that they're going to do that, I don't think they will go that far to supply the Ukrainian army with something similar to fight back against the Russians. then the thing is going to start really to escalate. I do not think that Putin is going to attack the NATO members, especially the most vulnerable, is of course Poland, Estland, Lithuania, Litauen, and then Slovak Republic, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Romania, and Moldova. That is something, and I don't think they're really gonna go on and then fight all of these other countries in a traditional war, in a tank warfare. Where you have a regular combat, traditional combat environment. I don't think they're gonna go that far. But of course, that is something which we have to see and watch on how this is gonna develop. If I was Russia, if I would put myself into their seats at the high command of the military and the political leaders, the question is, what objective do I want to accomplish with this, okay? Not from what they're telling us, but what is the real deal here? What do they want? Like I said before, the economical interest was that the Ukraine was one of their major manufacturing hubs in the Soviet Union. So it was a very, very important part in this whole thing. Gas production and oil and the steel and ore and the processing of it and technology and everything else. So it was very, very important. Plus you have the two ports there, Mariupol and Odessa, which were major shipping ports for the Soviet Union already back then. Those are very strategically very important, economically, strategically important areas which they need. Of course, you have to, I don't know what they want to do with the Ukrainians, so if they're going to move all the Ukrainians out, the way they did it with the Prussian people and other displaced people from World War II, and then move Russian citizens into the Ukraine and do the same thing what they did in Prussia, or now Kaliningrad Oblast, with Königsberg, Kaliningrad, or if they're going to leave the Ukrainian people there. That's something I don't know. This is already down the long range, but the end game in this is not to invade Poland or the Romania. This is going to be too tricky for them. They're pretty brave people, but they're not that brave to start a full-blown war with NATO. And if NATO can contain itself, I know they're already there on the borderline, on the east flank and on the southern flank, to get into action if they have to, but they will have to hold out. The other thing is with Germany, what I wanted to throw into this mix is our history, as you may remember, with 1914 and the First World War. Now, the situation in 1914 was that the Austrian Hungarian Empire, which was Catholic, I have to point that out for a reason, and the German Empire at this point, which was a mix of multiple religions, but predominantly Catholic and Protestant, where Austria is primarily Catholic. They had an incident with one of their crown princes got shot, and Austria had a treaty with the German Empire that in the case of a attack that they would react collectively. So the Austrians demanded now from the Germans, when the crown prince got shot in Sarajevo, to declare war. And the Emperor Wilhelm was not quite with it at that point, similar to what we're seeing with Scholze, with delivering happy weapons. Eventually, he got talked into this, more or less, by his generals. And, they said, well, and the Catholic people in Germany, the Catholic Church primarily, had a big say in this whole thing. So he had to listen to the bishops, to Rome, their interest in this, because this was the crown prince. This is, that's where all of this religious stuff went apeshit. And eventually they succumbed to this whole thing. This is something you don't hear very often, but you have to remember one thing in history books. It is always said, well, Wilhelm did this. No, this was not just Wilhelm. Wilhelm had to listen to a lot of different people, because we did have a governing body in Germany with elected officials, with representatives, and this and the other thing is, and there were parties involved in it, political parties and everything else. The Reichstag, yeah. Not every German, or not every woman and every German was fully entitled to vote at this point, but the pretty good chunk of the male population was able to vote already by 1914 for the Reichstag, and there were various different parties involved in this. In the Catholics, of course, the centrist party was the Catholics. They had a pretty good chunk of the seats in there, and that is something Emperor Wilhelm had to listen to. And they were, of course, closely connected ideology-wise, religious-wise, with the Austrian Empire, because that is, like I said, is a Catholic state, and the dominant force over the Catholic states, states is Rome, is the Vatican, is the ultimate spiritual authority in this picture. So all of these people had something to say in this, so he was encouraged by this. They had a treaty. If they would have not followed with the treaty, then he would have had a huge problem with the Catholic population in Germany, in the German Empire. The mix was about 50-50. It always has been like this: 50% Protestant, 50 or 49% Protestant, 49% Catholics, and the rest of it, the other 2%, that was Jewish and other minorities or other religious interests. Primarily it was Jewish at that point. So he had to listen to all of the stuff to make a decision whether or not to get involved in it. It was not just the military, but it was also the Catholic religious political institutions who not pressurized him, but urged him to get involved in this. And we're having a similar situation now with Scholze, where he's exposed to other parties and, and pressure to get involved in this, that, and the other thing. And so we're having some similarities here. Now we don't have a monarchy. There's not Emperor Wilhelm who has to make the decision. There's the Social Democratic Party leadership, Chancellor Scholze, and the Bundestag, and the Bundesrat. They have to look at these things, and there's things moving. There's people who want this happening with the heavy weapons deliveries, and there's people who are reluctant. And this is a lot of a replay of the similarities of what we had in 1914, when the Crown Prince of Austria got shot in Sarajevo. So this is, but shooting a crown prince is one thing. Invading a country like Russia is doing at the moment with the Ukraine, whether they have right-wing extremists in the military ranks or not, we can probably leave that out, because it is a fairly small number in the overall army structure there. It's not quite, we kind of would compare apples with bananas, but from our history we always seem to have been one wrong side of history, when Emperor Wilhelm should have said no to everyone and not get involved in this. That's why I said this might be the time here, without knowing all the classified information, which we're not privileged, I'm not privileged to know exactly of what they know and what they don't know. I would say yes to get involved in it with the heavy weapons, and that is my point. I may change that point if I think that there's a danger brewing in this, to see. We probably need to feel our way easy. We have to ease our way into this. But in the overall general thing is comparing 1914 with 2022 is the, support or the underlying causes for support and the interests involved in it is, like I said, is comparing apples with bananas. So I hope that explained a few things. And I've seen that it was now 24 hours ago, I put up the little questionnaire. Do you want to see something about the Order of the Black Eagle? And we will do that. 7 people voted so far for it. And I think it was 60-some% was pro and 29% or 71% for it and 29% against it. That is a absolute majority. We have 2/3 majority here. And so in the next few days, I will make a video about this and show you, some things what I got here personally, and see on how I can present that to you in a video. And I hope that will be then interesting. There's a lot of myth and a lot of wrong information out there about the order, or orders in general. Not just about the Order of the Black Eagle, of what they are and how people look at this. Most people today don't even know what orders are. Most people in Europe, probably as much as here in the United States, for the better part, don't know much about the political situation to begin with in either regions. When you ask people questions, I had a conversation with one person. They didn't even know Biden was president. And, well, we leave it by that. So never mind any history aspect of these things. I hope for peace. I always pray for peace. And we will see. But I think with the Ukraine, we have to be in this for the long haul until they have battled it out, basically. I think that might be one of those situations that we're not going to be able to go to the negotiating table and negotiate something, because the Ukrainians are vehemently against it to surrender any of their territory, which is understandable. No one wants to give any country up if you don't have to. And you surely don't want to lose it through a peace treaty, something which you may have had a chance fighting for. If we get prematurely into a peace treaty, that won't last for very long, because the emotions on both sides are so high that is just going to take a little tiny spark to ignite, and then you're going to be back at a war. This is going to be one of these rare instances where they have to battle it out. Unfortunately, with the cost to human life and material and everything else, but there won't be any long-term peace in this until it has been battled out. The sooner you get a peace, and it is one of these shaky peace deals, like they had already in the Donbass, this region, this whole thing is never going to come to peace. Then you're going to have a prolonged on and off war scenario, or terrorism kind of attacks with counter-military attacks from both sides, and they're going to draw on for decades to come. That is going to be on the news. It will never disappear. So this is my feeling in this, and I'm almost sure I'm right. I wish I wasn't right, but this is one of these strange feelings, when you have this in your gut, and you just know this is not going to happen, and these people won't be happy. The Ukrainians will not be happy with a settled peace if they have to surrender territory to the Russian Federation. That is the reality, and the Russians are not going to let that go if the Ukraine gets the Donbass region back. This is something, or this is it's a very, very complicated situation we have gotten there. Well, anyway, I will check in a few days, and we can expect maybe in the next 2 or 3 days a video about the Order of the Black Eagle. And with that, you have a great evening.